Did you hear that?
Yeah.
All right, so that's how you know. That's how you know it's working. Okay, when you hear that, you know that we're going live. We're recording. Okay. Let me just close these last windows over here. Open up the PowerPoint, and we are ready to roll. Okay, so welcome to the final class of this JLI course. What's so exciting about this course is that we've kind of been talking about it all year also, which is kind of interesting because we started the year with discussions of Mashiach. We've already had some classes on Mashiach, and so it's really exciting. It's been a year where we've been discussing Mashiach, and so we hope that he actually comes soon. And after all this discussion, this is something that really makes us desire Mashiach more, and that's really the idea, the study about Mashiach. Some people say, why study about it? Just wait till when he comes. We've had courses, which we discussed, studying about Mashiach, about how important it is to desire Mashiach and pray for Mashiach and how to bring Mashiach closer. But on top of all of that, something we never really discussed is studying about Mashiach itself makes us appreciate Mashiach, and therefore we will pray for the Mashiach. And it gives us that extra push. And so you can never really study enough about the Mashiach. And so that's the plan. We're going to keep studying about Mashiach. And in fact, as I'll tell you at the end of this class, there is even another mini course on Mashiach coming at the end of the summer. And it's actually a very interesting topic. And I will mention it to you towards the end. So without further ado, we're going to discuss today's class. And today's class is really we digress really from everything that we've discussed till now. In the previous 5 classes, we've really discussed the lead up to Mashiach. How do we bring Mashiach? What's going to bring the Mashiach? What's the soul of Mashiach? How is it that we're changing the world? Different ways that the redemption can come, and so on and so forth. But we didn't actually discuss, for the most part, except in passing, what happens when Mashiach comes. And that is really going to be the topic of today. And so we're going to get right into it. What exactly is going to happen when Mashiach comes? If you're using your student book, it's page 245. I'm just turning to that over here. Okay. So we are discussing, ultimately, I guess, putting it in another way, we are discussing the future. And as Yogi Berra put it, it's really tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So what are we going to spend our time doing? Of course, we're not just just randomly discussing the future, but we are going to look at the text of the prophets and how the rabbis understood them. So although generally you cannot tell the future, but if you have a prophet, of course, the prophet can tell you what's going to happen in the future. And so to an extent, there are things that we can know, and to an extent, there are things we don't know about the Mashiach. So before we start off, I'd like to hear from you. What is it that you know about the era of Mashiach? In other words, not the bringing of Mashiach, but when Mashiach comes, what does that look like? What happens in that era? If you want to put in the chat box or unmute yourself, let me know what comes to mind when you think about Mashiach. Or as the kids' book that I show my kids, maybe it'll show backwards to you, but what will the world be like when Mashiach comes? I'll show you what it depicts in that book in a moment, but what comes to mind when you think about Mashiach, the era of Mashiach?
Peace.
Peace. Okay, there will be peace in the world. Okay. What else? All the nations will recognize God. Correct. All of the nations will recognize Hashem more specifically. So not just God, but the God as we understand him. Any others?
The return of all Jews to Eretz Israel.
The return of all Jews to Eretz Israel. What do you mean by all Jews?
Everybody who is Jewish and everybody who is Jewish but doesn't know they're Jewish.
Okay.
The Mashiach will come and make it clear, and everybody gets the land back.
Okay, great. Will it also mean kids will stop crying? Okay. Yeah. Any others? That's pretty impressive. Now, no other thoughts? Huh?
The Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt as well.
Yes, the third temple. Okay. Anything miraculous? So just to show you an example, this is a kid's book that I get. In the kids' books, they take off of the they take off of the prophecies, and it starts up discussing, there's going to be no more robbers and no guns, no wars, no peace. But then it moves on to the more miraculous things. Nobody will be jealous. Everybody will share. There will be giant fruits. There's a discussion about that. In fact, in this week's Torah portion, we discussed giant fruits, different depictions of these giant fruits. The plentiful of food. The wolf will lie with the lamb, which sounds miraculous, right? Nobody will be sick, which is something we discussed earlier, which is miraculous. We also have the resurrection of the dead. Nobody mentioned that. Resurrection of the dead. We have a lot of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob coming back to life, and their grandparents. Everybody coming back to Israel, something you mentioned. The third temple coming down. And really all the nations of the world coming screaming towards the temple. So what I'm trying to show over here is that when we take a look at the times of Mashiach, it seems from what most of us hear is that it's going to be a very miraculous time. And the truth is that that's not necessarily true, or at least may not necessarily be true, at least in the beginning. So let's take a look at what Maimonides says. Maimonides, who is the classic commentator, telling us what has to happen when Mashiach comes. He says like this. Let me just enlarge this so I can see everybody. He says like, oops, it's too large. 1 second. Al Yala ala das, he says, do not presume that in the messianic age, any facet of the world's nature will change, or that there will be innovations in the work of creation. The world will continue according to its patterns. What he's saying is, the world will be like today. There will be Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Tesla and everything else, and nothing will change except the world will run like it normally runs. That's what he says. In other words, it won't be a miraculous type of world. And then he continues. But then the problem is we have the prophecies. Here's an example. The wolf will lie with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and yearling will be with the lion, and the little child will lead them all. So which one is it? Is the Mashiach a miraculous time, or is Mashiach a non-miraculous time? And so Maimonides himself, obviously, he knew the prophecies, and he himself went to answer that question. So again, he sets out and says, you think Mashiach is miraculous, that would be your automatic assumption reading any prophecies. No, it's not miraculous. So what are we going to do about the prophecies? So Maimonides says, very interestingly, the wolf will lie with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the young goat. These words are an allegory and parable. The interpretation of the prophecy is that Jews will dwell at peace together with those wicked Gentiles who had sought to devour them like a wolf and a leopard. They will no longer steal or destroy, but live at peace with Israel. Similarly, other messianic prophecies of this kind are allegories. Only in the messianic era will we understand the true meaning. So what he seems to say is, it's very possible. Sorry, kids, this book, it's just a joke. Mashiach's coming, and it's gonna be it'll be a nicer world. It'll be a better world. It'll be peace. People will get along, but it won't happen in a miraculous way. It'll happen in a very very natural manner. And so he says, anytime you see any miracles, understand it in a metaphorical way. So peace between animals means peace between nations. Let's say abundant food just means food will be easy to get, right? So it does discuss bread will grow on trees. It doesn't mean bread will grow on trees. It just means it'll be easy to get bread. It's a nice way of saying it. And the Maimonides, to put the nail in the coffin, says like this, and he says like this: our sages, text number 2, our sages taught there will be no difference between the current age and the messianic age. era except the emancipation from a subjugation to Gentile governments. What he means is that we as the Jewish people will be totally independent. I know you may say that Israel celebrates Independence Day once a year for 1948, but the truth is, as anybody knows, Israel is far from independent, unfortunately. They're very dependent on the nations around them and spend most of their time creating goodwill between other people and constantly, unfortunately, having to fight different battles, a PR battle and a battle with their actual enemies. And so when we say that what's really going to be special about the Messianic era, so to speak, going back to the times of King Solomon, okay, that's kind of what he's describing. It'll go back to a time where people will appreciate us, appreciate our message, and nobody will try and kill us, nobody will try and hurt us. It'll be a very peaceful time, just as in King Solomon. And for that to happen, you don't necessarily need a miracle. You can have a wonderful individual like the Mashiach, who will be so eloquent and will be like a King Solomon, will be able to explain to the world and show the world the truth of what he's saying. Now, is that a letdown to anybody over here? If that was all Mashiach would that be a letdown to you? Like, we spent all this time only to go to like a great monarchy, a great peaceful monarchy? That's my first question to you. My second question to you is, can you think of any prophecy that seems to be utterly miraculous? And a basic tenet of Jewish belief.
Revivification of the dead.
Resurrection of the dead, very good. Seemingly, all right, maybe you want to explain everything else allegorically, but a resurrection of the dead is seemingly very basic Jewish belief. How can you explain that allegorically? And if you do explain allegorically, then you're taking away the basic tenet of Jewish faith. So we will get into this. But so far, what Maimonides seems to be saying is it is possible to be an era of just world peace, possible to be an era of just goodness in the world. Seems to be what he's saying. Let's continue to see what else he may do. So I guess the answer is, it's later on in the class. The real answer is that there's, so to speak, a baseline arrival of Mashiach. When Mashiach first comes, there's going to be a baseline of his time. There's going to be, so to speak, a base of what Mashiach at minimum has to do. And at minimum, Mashiach is going to be a peaceful king like King Solomon and rule the world in that way. Can the Mashiach's coming be miraculous? Yes, that's the first point we're going to discuss later in the class. The second point we're going to discuss is that really within Mashiach, there's going to be two eras. There's going to be the era of Mashiach, which is going to be regular, and there could be an era of Mashiach after that, which is going to be miraculous, in a time when there will be a resurrection of the dead. But again, so really throughout this class, we're going to discuss for the most part, what are the basics that Mashiach has to do to be called the Mashiach, to be called the era of Mashiach. Can it be greater than that? It's possible. And this really harkens back to what I said in the beginning. It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So what we're trying to do is create a baseline of what Mashiach is going to look like, the times of Mashiach. Even then, we have to appreciate that's a baseline. It could be more than that. And we also have to appreciate there will come a time when the world will revert to something super miraculous. And really, at the super miraculous stage, we don't know much about that at all. It actually says about that, Ayin lo ra'ata Elokim zulatecha. Nobody's seen it except for God himself. Even the prophets only prophesied, so to speak, about the era of the coming of Mashiach and not the era after that. But did I confuse anybody over here? Hopefully not too much. Okay. So let's take a look. So far what we understand, Mashiach baseline is somebody who brings peace. He will make Israel a place of true independence. Then it continues. What else does Mashiach do? This is text number 3. Hamelech HaMashiach, the Messianic king, will arise and renew the Davidic dynasty. So now we have another thing Mashiach is going to do. Renew the Davidic dynasty, restoring it to its initial sovereignty. He will build a temple and gather the dispersed of Israel. In his days, the observance of all the statutes will return to this previous state. So he's saying a lot of important lines over here. A, he will return the dynasty of David, so we won't have continuous elections like we're having now. One king and that's it. Nothing changes. He'll build a temple. will gather the dispersed of Israel. That means we will all move to Israel. And all of the commandments will come back to their original state. So the temple will be built on the Temple Mount. Now, I know there's something else there right now, but that obviously will not remain, and the temple will be built on the Temple Mount. In addition to that, he says we will return to the observance of all the statutes. Let me just pause for a moment. Let me just show you a little bit here about what the Temple Mount is like. Do people here know a little bit about what the temple looks like and where it goes? And I have a short video here that kind of just gives you an idea to appreciate the temple. Let me just pull it up over here. Somebody put in the chat, is one of the miracles finding the hidden sparks of Hashem within the world. The sparks are not necessarily evident to us. In the first era, you may not. Yeah, that could be something we may not notice. Okay, let's take a look. Hey, it's supposed to play. Here it goes. Sorry.
God told the Jews at Sinai to build a temple so that his presence could dwell among them, a place to worship, to gather as a nation, to receive atonement, inspiration, and instruction. Half a millennia later, God's desired location for a permanent home was revealed to King David in the ancient city of Jerusalem, atop a hillside known for Abrahamic times as Mount Moriah. David's son, King Solomon, completed a magnificent structure that attracted the title Beis Hamikdash and Beis Hamikdash. It was fashioned with much gold, expensive woods, and precious materials. When it was completed in 827 BCE, the nation gathered to witness God's presence fill the temple. The mountain gained a new name, Har Habayit. At its summit, a stone building rose to enormous height. Within its gaping entrance was the Ulam, a lobby, beyond which was the Kodesh, furnished with 3 golden items, an altar for incense, a 7-branched menorah, and a table with racks for the showbread. At the sanctuary's far end, a separated area enclosed the temple's core, its most sacred location, the Kodesh HaKodashim, that held the Oron, the Ark of God, containing the tablets that Moses delivered at Sinai. The Ark of God rested upon a naturally protruding plateau, known as the Foundation Rock. Immediately outside the building, the courtyard of the Kohanim, priests, held a massive stone sacrificial altar with a lengthy access ramp. Nearby was the Kior, a cistern for rinsing hands and feet, and a platform for the Levites to chant psalms and play instruments. Further back, a larger area was designed for public assembly, known as the Women's Courtyard. It included an extensive wooden balcony for women. The nation would gather 3 times each year to celebrate the festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The compound was surrounded by a massive wall and contained a series of steps, numerous gateways, and guard posts. The temple's layout was exceptionally efficient, with compartments and chambers for every possible need, such as storage areas for wood, oil, and other materials, production and preparation areas, rooms for clothing, for weaponry in case of attack, ritual immersion pools, sleeping and eating areas, tool and instrument reserves, lockers for the priests, a charity room, a hall for Torah study, a chamber for the Sanhedrin, a lounge for temple officials, a repair workshop, animal holdings, ticket stations, and so on. There were separate entrances for distinct purposes, an oversight system, and honor guards. A small stream ran beneath the temple, which was used to maintain cleanliness. The temple stood for 4 centuries. It was destroyed by the Babylonian army in 423 BCE, rebuilt in 349 BCE, and stood for 4 centuries more until it was destroyed by the Romans in 69 of the Common Era. Through his prophets, God promised the Jews a third and eternal temple in the messianic era, from which his presence will spread to the world, embracing all of humanity.
All right, so that was a very nice depiction and a short history and what goes on in the temple. And when the Mashiach comes, we will have our temple back. The Mashiach will rebuild the temple. And along with the temple, by the way, will come something called animal sacrifice. Now, I know nobody here is looking forward to animal sacrifice, right? If I had to guess. Nobody here is excited about animal sacrifice. One second. But it is a primary feature of the temple. So what is the deal? Are we going to go back to animal sacrifices? And the answer is that we will. However, we have to understand, somebody once came to the Rabbi, actually said, are we really going to go back to animal sacrifice? And the Rabbi said, of course, somebody living today will not appreciate animal sacrifice, and it makes 100% sense. However, when Mashiach comes, we will have a different view of the matter, and we will be allowed the vision to understand the purpose and meaning behind animal sacrifice, and then we will appreciate it. So again, it's not something that we are expected to spend our time appreciating now. Personally, I have been to a slaughterhouse. I have been to a Jewish slaughterhouse, and I'll tell you, it's not a place you really want to hang out, even if you like eating animals. However, so again, I truthfully, even as a religious Jew, the idea of the animal sacrifice is something that I have trouble relating to, but I can appreciate that. Just as I don't understand everything, I'm not expecting to understand that at this point in time. Although, of course, I can understand different ideas related to it, but can't understand it fully.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, question. Yes, go for it.
Oh, yeah. What is the meaning with the red heifer?
Okay, so good question. That has to do with the temple. In the temple, you had to be pure. If you were impure, you would not be allowed into the temple. And the red heifer was a animal was a cow that had full red hair. Red fur, whatever you call it on a cow, not even 2 white hairs, and they would make a sacrifice of it and burn it after it was slaughtered, of course, not cruel, and then those ashes would be sprinkled on people and to purify them. So we all today need to be sprinkled upon. If you've ever been to a cemetery, you need to be sprinkled upon, and so we're all going to need to be sprinkled upon, and so that's about the red heifer. So that's why there are a lot of people in Israel always looking for the red heifer, because it says there were 9 red heifers before in the last 2 temples, and the 10th one will be when Mashiach comes. So people are already trying to look for one, so that when Mashiach comes, they can say, here, you can slaughter this one. And they do find them occasionally, although ultimately a lot of times they do start to change hair color at some point, and so that they have to keep looking for new ones. So we're waiting for the Mashiach to do the 10th one. Interestingly enough, about we said that Mashiach will bring back all of the Jewish practice. A lot of Jewish practice we don't do today because we don't have the temple, because we don't live in Israel, and so that is an important thing that Mashiach is going to bring back. Mashiach is going to bring back a lot of the practices, and amongst those practices, as I mentioned, the sacrifice, but there is more than just that. Now, why is there an obsession and a need for the temple? Why is the temple so important? And the answer is, as I said, that's the primary place where God reveals himself. That's the primary place where God will show himself. And in fact, it says that if the nations of the world recognized just what the temple meant to them, they wouldn't even destroy it. So let's take a look over here. This is from the Midrash. And good evening, Torah. This is from the Midrash. It says, if the nations of the world knew how beneficial the Holy Temple was for them, they would have surrounded it with fortifications in order to guard it. So far from deciding to destroy it, instead, they would have guarded it. And this is another fascinating thing about Judaism, is that Judaism, we don't view our holy places as exclusionary places and places where other people can't come, but in fact, we do want them to come and to appreciate what the temple is. And that's really what the exile is all about. Exile is a state of concealment. And there was such a state of concealment in the world that not only, unfortunately, some Jews didn't recognize the benefit of the temple, which is why they stopped showing up to pray, but also some of the Gentiles stopped showing up, and more importantly, they felt that they could destroy it. Let's take a look at the prophecy, where he discusses what will happen in the temple when Mashiach comes. The words of Isaiah, the son of Amos, prophesies concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall be at the end of days that the mountain of God's home shall be firmly established at the top of the mountains. It shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall go, and they shall say, come, let us go up to God's mountain, to the house of Jacob, and let him teach us of his ways, and we will go in his paths. It's interesting, by the way, a lot of these prophecies, like Isaiah, were said in between the first and second temple. However, when you read this prophecy, you know clearly that this did not happen during the times of the second temple. The second temple was not, we didn't have these stream of nations like we had in the first. And if anything, we had a stream of nations coming to ransack it multiple times during the time of the second temple. Another thing that I want to point out that's clear from this prophecy is that non-Jewish people will not have to convert. We will not all be Jewish people. As it says, there will be nations of the world, and they will also come to the temple. So we don't have a belief that everybody has to convert to Judaism. In fact, they can just keep the 7 Noahide laws. And if they keep the 7 Noahide laws, that is what's expected of them. I want to add on to that. Not only that, actually conversion will not be allowed and accepted when the Mashiach comes, because conversion requires a strong level of commitment and doing it because you feel that's what you want. When Mashiach comes, and we'll have, the Mashiach will be obviously from the Jewish nation. Now, many people want to convert because suddenly, oh, look, everybody else is doing it, let me join, So at that point, conversion will not be accepted. Although, of course, it does say somebody who's already on the path of conversion, and then Mashiach comes in the middle, they will be allowed to complete that. I also want to mention one other thing. Some people understand that the purpose of the Gentiles when Mashiach will come is just to serve the Jewish people. The Rabbi has a lengthy talk in his book of talks, look at the Sifros, volume 23, where he goes at length to discuss, although there is an element of that, but the Gentiles have a purpose of their own, and it's not just to serve the Jewish people. And he gives an example similar to we as Jews kind of serve the Kohanim, and the Levites, or the Levites serve the Kohanim. Although, yes, they're helpers, but they also have their own purpose. So it's kind of a similar relationship over there. But, and although if you look at some of the prophecies where it discusses how non-Jews will serve the Jewish people, Ibn Ezra, one of the famous commentators, discusses that's how he described it. He describes it will be more like, the Jewish people helping the Kohanim, giving them their tithes and stuff like that. That doesn't mean that Jewish people have no purpose in themselves. And it's, we all serve the Kohanim, and the Kohanim serve the Kohen Gadol, and we all don't have any purpose. Someone asked over here. Someone asks over here that someone told me that at the moment we're not allowed in the Temple Mount, which is why. Okay. Getting done with the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Should we be allowed on the Temple Mount? The answer is that what today is known as the Temple Mount is not the full Temple Mount. It's larger than the original Temple Mount. However, yes, we as Jewish people, according to most rabbinic opinions, should not be on the Temple Mount. That doesn't necessarily mean we should allow other people on the Temple Mount. That's another discussion. But nobody's asking me. So the reason why they have their mosque on the top has nothing to do with Jewish law. It has to do with the Israeli government. From a perspective of Jewish law, yes, we should not be roaming around the Temple Mount. Even those Jews who go on the Temple Mount, they do not go on the whole thing. typically. I think most of them don't. They go on just a couple parts of it. Someone else writes here, Isaiah says they come to God's house. That, yes, that is because the temple is God's house. As the original instruction of God, Va'asu li mikdash, make for me a temple, v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell amongst them. So God is saying this is going to be my home. It's his home from which he spreads to the rest of the world. I want to mention something else. We spoke about, Maimonides mentioned the ingathering of the exiles. What controversial topic is there in the ingathering of exiles? So ingathering of exiles, we understand. Ingathering of exiles will mean that we all will return to the land of Israel. We'll get an El Al flight. Hopefully they'll be nicer to us this time, and we'll all land the land of Israel. Okay, if we're taking a non-miraculous route, of course. If we take a miraculous route, maybe we'll fly on clouds. But we as Jews will all move out of wherever we are, and we will land at the Temple Mount, okay? My question to you is, what other idea of the Temple Mount, what other idea of ingathering of exiles, controversial topic, do you know about? Waiting for someone who, and any thoughts, ingathering of exile? No? Come on, this is like the one thing everybody asks the rabbi about. The gathering of all the exiled Jews. And I was surprised nobody mentioned it in the, where else do we have lost Jews?
Ethiopian Jews?
Okay, getting close. What do they say they are?
They are from the original tribe.
Okay, what are they called? Getting there?
I forget.
Anybody? Come on, the 10 lost tribes. This is like the thing. All right, I see everybody knows. Everybody's like, oh yes, the 10 lost tribes. 10 lost tribes. That's always something everybody likes to discuss and talk about. What's the deal with the 10 lost tribes? So let's give you a little history, because everybody says, oh, these Jews are the 10 lost tribes. Those Jews are the 10 lost tribes. Ethiopians are the 10 lost tribes. What's the deal behind these 10 lost tribes? And the answer is, goes back to the times of the temple. After King Solomon, his son took over King Solomon, and his son raised taxes. Now, as we know from the when the British tried it on us, that doesn't ever work well. And the Jewish kingdom split into two. And so there was one kingdom of two tribes, Benjamin and Judah, which was King David. King David's grandson was the king over there, the King David dynasty. Then there were the 10 tribes, which were led by kings from other tribes. So we had this split, and this happened in about 557. Now in the year 556 BCE, sometime around then, the Assyrians entered the land of Israel, and they took a bunch of the tribes and they exiled them to faraway lands. So they never invaded the kingdom of the two kings, but they invaded the kingdom of the 10 tribes. Again, the people there were warned repeatedly by the prophets that they should repent. They didn't. And so ultimately, this king of Assyria came there, and it discusses in general, he did this all over the world. If you want a subservient nation, you uproot nations. And so that was his idea. He would take people from here, put them there, take people from there, put them here. So he obviously took these 10 tribes and moved them around, which tells us that there were 10 full tribes of Jewish people. That's a lot of people that were exiled to some faraway land. And what else do we know about it? And so from this point on in Jewish history, really Jewish history followed just the remaining two tribes, which is the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah. Now, that doesn't mean there were no other tribes left amongst the Jewish people. There were of the other 10 tribes in that kingdom. Okay, so if Jews didn't like what was going on in the other kingdom, they would come to the kingdom of the two tribes. So we have still today a mixture of all the tribes. In addition to that, many of the Kohanim and Levites came to the temple because that's where their services were needed, and was in the kingdom of the two tribes. So we have these 10 tribes that are exiled. They're shrouded in mystery. They kind of missed out on a lot of history. Remember, they were not even around in the second temple. So the miracle of Hanukkah, the miracle of Purim, and even the destruction of the temple, they didn't know about. I think they even say when they came to the Ethiopian Jews, and then they told them there was no temple. They were like shocked, surprised. So the fate of the 10 tribes is a mystery. And in Jewish sources, you'll see a couple different things. So let's take a look over here. Let's take a look at one debate in the Talmud. What's going to happen with the 10 tribes when the Mashiach comes? So he says, the 10 tribes are not destined to return as it is stated. God cast them into another land like this day. Just as the day passes, never to return, so have they gone into exile, never to return. This is the view of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer stated like this day, just as the day darkens and then brightens, so the 10 tribes who experience darkness will in the future experience light. So here we have a debate. Will the Jewish people return or not? And according to Rabbi Akiva, the 10 tribes are gone and they're never coming back. According to Rabbi Eliezer, they are coming back. Now, there are many, many different interpretations given to what this section of the Talmud means. In addition, there is another famous midrash which discusses that the 10 tribes are lost somewhere behind a river called the Sambation River. It says there's a river called the Sambation River, and behind this river, there's a bunch of lost Jews. And what does the Sambation River do? This river, during the week, rages and it throws stones in the air, and anybody tries to cross it can never get across, which will also include the Jewish people that are stuck behind it. And on Shabbos, nothing happens there. It rests. However, none of the Jews there will escape because they all keep the Shabbat. So you have this river keeping them in. Now, whether that midrash is literal or not, again, is subject to debate. The Maharal discusses that it's not. However, the question really is, are there these 10 tribes that we have no idea where they are, but they exist somewhere in a set setting, or have they gotten lost amongst all the people? So the Maharal understands the debate like this. He kind of looks at it like this. He says that Rabbi Akiva believes that the Jewish people, they got dispersed amongst all the nations. They lost their identity as Jews, and they're never coming back. Okay? In other words, they've assimilated. They don't even know they're Jewish people, and Mashiach is not coming to bring them back. However, Rabbi Eliezer holds that even if they've assimilated, Mashiach will bring them back to their Jewish faith and will bring them back to the Jewish people. However, regardless of which side you believe in,
Fine blue doggy. Fine blue doggy.
huh?
Oh, no. Sorry.
Regardless of which side we believe in, one thing's for sure is there will be a land of Israel with the 12 tribes. If you look at the map of Israel, you see there's a depiction of the 12 tribes in there. And so when Mashiach comes, we will have all 12 tribes there. Now, I want to discuss a little bit more about the Ethiopians and the debates that has brought. So first, let me give you a little bit of history. First, it goes back to a guy called Eldon Hadani. I pulled a Wikipedia, not because just because it's always the first thing Google shows. Necessarily it's the most authoritative on Jewish ideas, but their general ideas are okay. So Eldad Hadani, as he was known, was an interesting character. He lived from the years, or at least we know of him from 851 to 900, so he lived longer than that. He was a Jewish merchant and traveler, and he claimed that he came from a Jewish tribe in East Africa. And as his last name describes, he called himself Hadani, from the tribe of Dan. And during his day, he told wondrous stories and how exactly he escaped the other side of the river, or wherever the 10 tribes are. Very, very fascinating character. And there's been debate till today whether his account was true or not, or whether it was fantastical. But many have accepted what he said is true, the idea that there is a Jewish state in East Africa. Now, then let's go a little bit further in history. So this is in the year 851, 900. Now you have a rabbi called Rabbi David ben Solomon ibn Ezra, the Radvaz, as he was known. And he lived in 1479 to 1573. And he has a very interesting responsa in his book of responses. He says there was once a Jew who bought a slave from, I believe he said they're Ethiopia or East Africa. And the slave, so he bought this girl, okay? She was a slave. He bought her in the marketplace in the days of slavery. He bought her, and she said that she was Jewish. And then this Jewish merchant married this slave that he bought. He obviously didn't treat her like a slave, but he was redeeming her. He married her, had kids. And then the question came to the Radvaz, is she Jewish or not? And the Radvaz, again, this is going back to the 1400s or the 1500s, said, yes, she is Jewish. So that's the first account that we have that there may be some Jewish families stuck in Ethiopia. And then the story continues really to our times. So in our times, obviously we know in Ethiopia it's a group called Beta Israel. They're a group in Ethiopia which have a lot of Jewish customs, and for many years nobody really had anything to do with them. With the advent of religious Zionism, now the religious Zionists believed that the establishment of the state of Israel was a part of the coming of Mashiach. We discussed last week how it isn't, but they believed that it was part of the coming of Mashiach, and in fulfillment of those prophecies, they also felt it's their mission to bring back the lost Jews, right? Because part of the mission of Mashiach is to bring back the lost Jews. And so starting with the religious Zionists, it's interesting to start with the religious, but particularly Rabbi Kook. Rabbi Kook, for anybody who's heard of him, a very famous Israeli rabbi. Maybe I can pull him up over here. Rabbi Kook, Rabbi Isaac Kook. He passed away in 1935. So in the 1930s, he spoke about how we have to get these Ethiopian Jews out and bring them. Again, and his idea, this was a part of the Mashiach. Now, Israel didn't do anything about it. And the interesting thing is that really their plight only came to head in 1973. So although the Rav Kook was pro bringing them in, there was a debate whether they were actually considered Jewish or not. Again, they didn't have all the customs that we have. It's kind of interesting customs that they have. In 1973, Ovadia Yosef, the most influential Sephardic rabbi, passed a ruling that Ethiopian Jews are Jewish. Okay, that was his ruling. In 1974, the Ashkenazi chief rabbi changed his mind, and he agreed with the Sephardic chief rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Gorn, agreed with Rabbi Ovadia Yosef that the Ethiopian Jews are Jewish. And then eventually, Israel, I believe in 75, Menachem Begin changed the law of return to include Ethiopian Jews. So the law of return is that anybody Jewish can return to the land of Israel. Until Begin changed the law, the Ethiopian Jews were not considered Jewish. They wouldn't be allowed to come in. Because the law of return used to say that you have to be a halakhic Jew to return to the land of Israel. So that's why they needed the rabbis first to say that. Now, although this is the history of the Beta Israel group, many rabbis still today say that not necessarily, we're not sure that they're for sure Jewish. They could have Jewish ancestry, but they say, how do we know that they themselves are Jewish? Particularly, maybe there was intermarriage. There's a possibility that some of them are Jewish, but some of them aren't. I guess you could compare it to a similar case to the conversos of Spain. We have many people in Spain. It says in Spain, almost every Jew in Spain has like 1/4 Jewish blood today. Okay, they do their DNA testing because of the Spanish Inquisition. Many Jews stayed there and became Marranos, hidden Jews, and whatnot. But nevertheless, just because someone says, "Oh, I have a tradition, I come from Jewish blood," we're not going to say, "Oh, they're Jewish," because we don't know that their mother's was Jewish. Judaism goes by the mother, so it's possible that they're Jewish. I've heard of a few cases where people were actually able to prove that their mother's mother was Jewish in Spain. There have been a few cases, but generally it's very, very difficult. So the rabbi said about, yes.
What about the Russians? How do we know the Russians that came to Israel that they were Jewish? They haven't practiced Judaism since 1917.
So with the Russians, the rabbis spent a lot of time verifying. But that's a lot shorter period of history. 80 years is a lot different than 500 years in the case of Spain, which is a lot different from the Ethiopian Jews, which is over 2,000 years, right? It's a very big difference. And the difference is also the other Sephardic communities in Africa always had contact with the Ashkenazi Jews. There was back and forth scholarly debates. For some reason, the Beta Israel never had this connection. And so part of the worry is even if we were to say they were part of the original Jewish people, there's a possibility that without the rigid, strict laws that we have, there was intermarriage or different things. And so many rabbis say till today that they should do something what's called giur l'chumra. They should take a conversion just in case, which, by the way, is something many Russian Jews did too, just in case. If somebody can't fully prove they're Jewish, they will many times do what's called a conversion just in case. Just, as they say, just to cover your bases. Either way. So that is the history of the Ethiopian Jews, and whether they are part of the 10 tribes or not is subject to debate today. I think what's not debatable, it's pretty obvious that they definitely come from Jewish lineage. Whether we can consider them Jewish off the bat or not, that is a debate till today raging in the land of Israel. Just to give you a little bit of history on that. Very fascinating topic. Yes.
I saw this whole video the other day. I'll have to send it to you by a rabbi talking about this very subject and talking about how some of the Pashtuns they found maybe part of the 10 tribes, like in Pakistan. And he went into this whole thing about the 10 tribes and where they went and everything. Well, and so that was really, I found that interesting. And also talking about now with DNA, and I saw another video about this, that there's a common like DNA strand that happens to be in all like hereditary Jews, whether they're Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi. They found, from my understanding, a DNA strand that really connects them all.
Right, yeah. And the only question again would be, in that case, would that strand pass over if somebody's mother wasn't Jewish? So that would be another interesting thing. I want to mention, I forgot to mention one other thing. There is a discussion where Jeremiah did go out and bring back some of the lost tribes. I have to mention that. So Jeremiah did already in the past bring back some of the lost tribes. I also want to mention that there's an interesting discussion in the Talmud where it says there was a certain area where historically they believed that that's where the 10 tribes were taken. And they said that therefore, if a Jewish person goes there and marries one of the locals, they should make sure to get a get. If they divorce, they should make sure to get a get just in case the locals there are Jewish. It's an interesting history over there. And yes, there are actually some people say that Jews were in Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's interesting tidbits of history. All right, but I want to move on to the next section. So just so people aren't lost, what have we discussed so far? So far we've discussed what happens when the Mashiach comes. When the Mashiach comes, at the baseline, there will be peace. Everybody will appreciate the Mashiach and the message that he's going to bring to the world. Israel will be very independent under King Mashiach. He will rebuild the temple, bring back all the Jewish people, reinstitute all of our Jewish practices, and the nations of the world will also stream and come and serve the one God, even though they will not be Jewish, but they will serve the one God, and finally we'll have all of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Next, we're going to discuss an important Jewish institution, and that is the institution of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a Jewish body, a judicial body, and this Jewish judicial body will return when the Mashiach comes, and this is clear in the prophecies. So let's take a look. The prophecy says in Isaiah, text number 7, it says like this: Va'ashiva shoftayach kavarishana, I will restore your judges as in the days of old, and your counselors as in the beginning. Afterwards you shall be called a city of righteousness, faithful city. So no more will there be the, so to speak, high court of Israel. We will go back to the original Jewish court, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was an ancient judicial system which follows the laws of the Torah. And all of the rabbis within the Sanhedrin had to have rabbinic ordination originating from Moses. So Moses gave his ordination to Joshua, and Joshua passed it on, and then it kept getting passed down. And so the Sanhedrin was a Jewish body governing a body of law. And the main body of the Sanhedrin was in the Holy Temple, and there were 71 of them. So let's read over here. Maimonides says, originally when the Holy Temple was built, the Supreme Sanhedrin, which is the 71 rabbis, would hold session in its chamber of the hewn stone. So they had a chamber in the temple where they would give their, run the court cases. When things went awry, the Sanhedrin went into exile, convening in various locations, 10 in total, the last being Tiberias. Since then, the Sanhedrin has not reconvened. We have tradition that the Sanhedrin will be restored in Tiberias first, and from there will be relocated to the temple. So Tiberias, which by the way is named after Roman Emperor Tiberius, but in Hebrew also can mean Tav Re'i, which means good appearance. The city of Tiberias was a beautiful city, and it still is. And it says in many places that Mashiach will first reappear in Tiberias, because that's the last place the Sanhedrin was. Just give you another midrash. Again, we don't know exactly how things are going to play out. But the point is we're going to have this court. Now, of the most important things that this court did, aside from adjudicating law. So today we have law, and we don't know what to follow, right? But we don't have a Sanhedrin. For example, I just gave the debate. Are the Ethiopian Jews Jewish, or do they need to have a conversion? It's a debate raging till today, and we don't have a final arbiter in this case. If we were back in the days of the temple, the Sanhedrin would come in and they would discuss it and they would debate it and they would come to final ruling, and everybody would have to follow that ruling. So that is one beautiful thing about the Sanhedrin. All these debates that are unresolved, they will ultimately be resolved in the times of Mashiach. So that's one great thing about having the Sanhedrin back. The law is you have to follow what the Sanhedrin says. It's interesting also, the Sanhedrin is today, there's what's called a dissent, right? In the Supreme Court, when they have a debate, the judges who disagree write a scathing, explanation of why they disagree, right? In the days of the Sanhedrin, the debates raged only till the law was adjudicated. Once the law was adjudicated, all of the people there had to back it. All of the people in the court had to back it. They had to submit to the majority opinion, because otherwise it creates divisiveness. And the point, which as we see still happens today. And the point of the Sanhedrin, the High Court, is to have a place where there's a final ruling. And we cannot have, some people come in and say, yeah, that's the final ruling, but I still totally disagree. And you should just, the court ruled leniently, but I think we should, just to be sure, we should be a little strict or something like that. There had to be a final ruling and belief that this is what God wants, because we were following the commandments and how to run the court. And then it's following the multitude opinion. So that is one amazing thing the Sanhedrin is going to do for us. Imagine a time and era where there is less rabbinic debate. But the second thing it does for us is the calendar. You're all familiar with the Jewish calendar to an extent, I'm sure. The Jewish calendar is a wondrous thing. It used to be back in the day. The Jewish calendar was established by the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin would have witnesses come to them, tell them when the moon would appear, and then they would decide this is the first day of the month, and that's the first day of the month, and then they would establish leap years. Their job was mostly to make sure that Passover always falls out in the spring. Hillel, one of the great rabbis, today we all know many institutions named after him, Hillel, but Hillel realized at a certain point the Sanhedrin is going to be disbanded, and he set up a calendar that we follow till today. However, that's not the optimal. The optimal is that we have the Sanhedrin establishing it every month. And so when the Mashiach will come, we will follow the Sanhedrin again. The Sanhedrin will decide when the new month is and when the new month isn't. And by the way, it's important because even though Hillel's calendar was very, very good, very accurate, until today, from when he made it 2,000 years ago, Passover has never fallen outside of the spring. Eventually, the calendar will deviate. It's not, the math calculation cannot be perfect. You will need human correction eventually. And in fact, I remember once one of my friends showed me that in 68,000 years, the first night of Passover will fall on December 25th. So give it enough time, and everything will break. We have, which is also, by the way, amazing that Hillel made such an amazing calendar, that we can really calculate as far as we want, and it's worked all this time of exile. But again, Hillel knew when he made it, he only had to make it last till the coming of Mashiach, till, at most till the year 6,000, which we're almost at. So it's definitely worked. Okay, so that's another thing Mashiach is going to do. He's going to bring the Sanhedrin, And now we're going to go on to the next thing, the Armageddon. But any questions on the past sections that we've discussed? Nope. Okay, now we're going to discuss the Armageddon. Anybody knows? It's interesting that Armageddon is called Armageddon. Armageddon is the Greek word for Mount Megiddo. And in Christian sources, it's presented as the place where the final battle at the end of days will happen. And of course, in their descriptions, Christianity comes out on top. Christian sources also use the name apocalypse, and that's the Greek word for prophecy about suffering at the end of days. Now, many Christian ideas come from Jewish sources. In the Tanakh, in our Jewish Bible, it does describe a great war that will occur in the future land of Israel. And the Jewish sources understood this great war as happening before the Mashiach. And in fact, the prophet Zechariah says that there will be great mourning in Jerusalem over the war. And he will compare that mourning to a mourning that once happened in the valley of Megadon, which is in the land of Israel. So he's not saying that the war was going to happen in the valley of Megadon, but he was saying the mourning that the people will mourn after that war will be like they once mourned in the valley of Megadon. And so it's interesting, for whatever reason, the Christian sources, like, something got lost over there. And so they understood that it's the war of the Armageddon, taking from the word Megadon. But again, in Jewish sources, it's not happening in Megadon. It's just the mourning will be like what happened in the valley of Megadon. So it's just a very interesting thing. So in Judaism, we don't call it the Armageddon because it has nothing to do with that. Actually, in Judaism, we call it the war of Gog and Magog. So when you hear apocalypse or the Armageddon, those are Christian ideas. In Judaism, it's definitely not apocalypse. And we don't discuss Christianity coming on top, of course not. It's not Armageddon. It doesn't happen in Megiddo. The mourning will be like Megiddo. In fact, it's a war between Gog and Magog, which actually may not even happen between the Jewish people at all. So let's take a look over here at the sources. So this idea that there has to be this great war to usher in the end of days, even if it's true, it may not affect us as Jewish people too much. It's happening between Gog and Magog. It may have nothing to do with us. It may just be us, a world of war between some powers. Anyway, let's take a look over here. The straightforward interpretation of the prophet's words to imply that the war of Gog and Magog will occur at the beginning of the Messianic age. Before this war, a prophet will arise to inspire Israel to be upright and to prepare their hearts, as it is stated, behold, I am sending you Elijah. Some sages state that Elijah's coming will precede the coming of Mashiach. All of these and similar matters cannot be definitely known until they occur, for these matters are not clarified in the prophet's words. So Maimonides is laying something down. Although we hear about the war of Gog and Magog, it's not so clear. Don't make this your big thing. Again, I want to point this out again and again, just because sometimes, we gave ideas to Christianity, and then now we're taking back from Christianity. And so a lot of Jews have this idea that there's going to have to be this crazy war before Mashiach comes. And Maimonides is saying, slow down. Not necessarily. We don't fully understand what this war Gog and Magog is and exactly how it's going to play out, if it even will play out. It's not important. And here's another text. This is from the Talmud, just showing you how not so important Gog and Magog is. Rabbi Shem Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yochanan taught in the name of Rabbi Shem Bar Yochai. Suffering a wayward child at home is more difficult than the war of Gog and Magog. So again, he's saying, if you have a child at home who's misbehaving, who's rebelling, which unfortunately a lot of people are having that, right? That's going to be more difficult than the war of Gog and Magog. And then he brings an example. He proves it from King David, where King David pretty much said that his problems with his sons was more difficult than Gog and Magog. And so that's what Rabbi Shimon is trying to tell us. He's trying to tell us, you want to focus on Gog and Magog? Focus on what's going on in your own home. Focus on what's going on with your kids. Because if your kids go wayward, that's a lot more difficult than all of these prophecies and promises of Gog and Magog. And again, to me, this is such a powerful and beautiful teaching. Instead of us as Jews, our idea of Messiah is not to wait for some apocalyptical event which will usher in something. It's what we are doing. What can we do? That's what's important to us. Am I making sure in my home, my children are taken care of? Am I making sure in my home, my children are going to follow the path that I'm trying to give them? What's going to happen? The big war, quote unquote, the Armageddon. Those are things beyond our understanding, and they're just out there. That's And it's what's more important is for us to focus on what we can do in our lives. And again, I think it's just a beautiful teaching and the way that Judaism looks at it, and not waiting on someone else, but us taking the bull by the horns and focusing on what we can do. So hopefully that lays to rest the hyper focus on Gog and Magog. And I just want to add one last thing. In Hasidic teachings, the Rebbe Maharash, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, wrote in the year 5677. So now we're in the year 5780. So 5677, about 104 years ago, he wrote that we have a tradition from our holy teachers that as of this time, we have been exempted from the wars of Gog and Magog. And that after the ingathering of the exiles, the Jewish people will dwell peacefully on their land forever. So what he was saying was, we've suffered enough and we will not have to go through this Gog and Magog war. And again, that is a Hasidic teaching. I'm not necessarily teaching it as a mainstream Jewish thought, but in Chabad Hasidic philosophy, that is a part of our thought. Again, you may ask, how can it not happen if it's prophesized? And this is something I mentioned many times, is that negative prophecies don't have to take place. If a negative prophecy doesn't happen, that doesn't show that the prophet was wrong. Only all positive prophecies will happen. Negative prophecies don't have to happen, because God can always say, you repented, or something else happened, I'm not going to bring that negative consequence upon you. And we see this time and again in the book of the prophets. Okay. A couple other things that will happen when Mashiach comes. So we've discussed Mashiach will create this utopian era led by the Mashiach, a peaceful time. We will not be subjugated to other nations. Mashiach will restore the temple. He will bring back all the Jewish people. We discussed the 10 lost tribes. We will bring the observance of all of the Torah mitzvot. All the Torah mitzvot will be kept, including the sacrifice. The nations of the world themselves will come to appreciate what we do. We also spoke about the war of Gog and Magog, or as some people know it, the Armageddon. We also spoke about the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court. One thing we didn't discuss is the great meal that it says is going to happen when the Mashiach comes. That's something we discussed at length in the previous course, if you want to look at that. A couple other things that we mentioned in previous courses. Of course, there will be no more war, no more crime. Those are things that are mentioned in Isaiah, because as we know, it will be a time of peace. There will also be no poverty, something we discussed at length in the beginning of the course. We also discussed there will be plenty of food, and there will be no disability. Those are all clear in the prophets. So now some of those sound a little bit unrealistic, non-miraculous. So how does Maimonides explain that? Maimonides says, let's take a look at Maimonides, some of these miraculous things. He says, the messianic era is defined as a time in which sovereignty will return to Israel and the Jewish people will return to the land of Israel. In those days, it will be extremely easy for people to make a living. A minimum of labor will produce tremendous benefit. This is the meaning of our sage's statement. In the future, the land of Israel will bring forth ready-baked rolls and fine woolen garments. The great benefit of that era is that we will experience respite from the oppression that prevents us from doing good. There will be a widespread increase of wisdom, as it is stated, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. War and battle will cease. As it is stated, nation will not lift up a sword against nation. The human lifespan will be lengthened as a result of the absence of stress and suffering. We do not long and hope for the messianic era simply because we desire an abundance of produce and property, or because we wish to ride horses or ride Teslas, or to drink wine to the accompaniment of music, as some confused people think. Rather, our prophets and pious yearn for that era, because then the righteous will assemble and good conduct and wisdom will prevail. It will be possible then to observe the entire Torah without worrying and fear. So what Maimonides is saying, if we were to say that Mashiach is going to be non-miraculous, at least in the beginning, what it means is life will be easy, and when life will be easy, we'll be able to serve God without any hindrance. They tell the story of a teacher who comes to the class and says, I want you all to write an essay on what you will do if you win $1 billion in the lottery. And so at the end of the lesson, everybody brings in their essay, and little boy Isaac walks over to the teacher and gives the teacher a blank piece of paper. And the teacher says, why haven't you written anything for your essay? And he says, exactly, because if I won $1 billion, I wouldn't be doing essays. So I was bringing that because he mentioned over here, we're not looking forward to a time where we have peace and we can sit and watch Netflix all day. That's not what we're looking forward to. We're looking forward to a time where we have so much peace and a time in which we can serve God honestly and serve God properly. Now we come to the next section, which is really discussing the miraculous, the resurrection. So as I mentioned earlier, where Maimonides describes this period of non-miraculous peace, I said earlier, that's the baseline. The baseline of Mashiach is going to have to be non-miraculous peace. But even if that happens, Maimonides himself agrees, and he writes in other places, that there will come a period when things will turn miraculous. One example, of course, will be the resurrection of the dead. So even within the era of Mashiach, there's, so to speak, there could be a simple era, peaceful era in a natural way, and then will come an era of supernatural. So even Maimonides agrees that the supernatural will happen. So let's take a look at Maimonides. So Maimonides was being hammered by a lot of people. People were saying, what are you saying? Everything's an allegory. What about the resurrection of the dead? Yada, yada, yada. So Maimonides had to write a defense. So he wrote like this. This is what's called Igeres Taimon. Not Igeres Taimon. Maimonides' epistle on the resurrection. So he writes like this. It's important to realize that when I stated that certain prophecies are to be understood allegorically, this is not absolute. No prophetic communication informed me that they are allegorical, nor did I receive a tradition from the sages and prophets that these particular matters are parables. Let me explain what brought me to the allegorical approach. I strive to bring harmony between the Torah and human intellect, which is why I explain things in the natural way whenever possible. However, when it is self-evident that the connection is miraculous indeed, and it is not possible to interpret otherwise, I say that it is a miracle. The bottom line is that regarding specific prophecies about the redemption that do not involve the fundamentals of our Jewish faith, it matters not whether one believes that they are literal or allegorical. We will have to wait for their realization, may it occur speedily in our days, to discover whether these statements refer to actual miracles or simple allegories for natural changes. So what he's saying is, even when I said that they are allegorical, he's saying not necessarily. All he was saying was you don't have to believe that those miracles will happen as miracles. You don't have to. It's not a basic tenet of Jewish faith that you have to believe that the wolf will actually lie with the lamb and not eat it. Okay, that's not important. What is important is to believe there will be peace, because that's clear. What is important is to believe in the resurrection. But the other things, whether you believe it will be miraculous or won't be miraculous, the main thing is to believe that the Mashiach is coming. And again, the idea that there still will be a resurrection of the dead, as many commentaries point out, means there definitely will be a second era of Mashiach. I do want to give a cheap plug over here. We will discuss the resurrection of the dead more at length in another course, a short mini series on resurrection of the dead, because the resurrection of the dead comes with a lot of interesting questions. So just one example, I don't know if they're going to discuss in the course, but just something, an interesting example. Let's say somebody marries twice when they get resurrected, who are they married to? Things like that. A lot of interesting things about resurrection. Resurrection is really the super miraculous section of the Mashiach. The part that Maimonides doesn't talk about a lot. His main point is, though, that we have to have a belief, and it's a basic tenet of belief, that we will come to a perfect and utopian era. Whether it happens exactly miraculous way or not in a miraculous way, that's not important.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it possible that, if you're saying in the beginning it won't be as miraculous, but maybe because they'll be we'll be operating at such a higher level of vibration, then things will become more miraculous because it'll break down whatever the barriers are between us and our corporal sense. And I'm not sure exactly how to put it.
I hear what you're saying. It's interesting. When the Rabbi discussed this topic, he said, first of all, even when Maimonides says it may not be miraculous, he also said it could be miraculous. And so the Rebbe's answer to that was, well, it depends how Mashiach comes. If Mashiach comes because we were meritorious, then it'll be miraculous. If we weren't meritorious, it won't be miraculous, in the beginning at least. But to your point, really, I guess that also relates to your point. It's possible, yes. And therefore, once Mashiach comes and we're operating at a higher level, then that brings on the miraculous era and state. I don't know. It's a good theory. I'm not going to say no or yes. I don't know. Let's take a look here at Maimonides discussing directly the resurrection of the dead. The resurrection of the dead, this is from his letter called Epistle Resurrection of the Dead, second section. The resurrection of the dead will occur as a miraculous event, as we have explained. However, the credibility of such an event can only be based on the words of a prophet. Now, at the time of the giving of the Torah, nearly all of humankind denied the transmission of the prophecy to God from God to humans. They also denied that God could perform miracles, considering them instead acts of magic or trickery. Indeed, the Egyptians denied that Moses performed godly miracles and tried to show that they could turn sticks into snakes by other means. The Jews themselves were influenced by their worldview, evidenced by their expressing astonishment that God revealed himself to them at Mount Sinai, indicating that they considered prophecy impossible. How then could such a miraculous event that lies exclusively on belief in prophecy be conveyed to those who are not yet ready to accept the concept of prophecy or the concept of a miracle? When God wished to give us the Torah, he first had to produce the greatest miracles recorded throughout the Torah to authenticate thereby the prophecy of the prophets and the possibility of miracles. For that reason, at this stage, God only divulged the concept of reward and punishment that occurs within the scope of nature. God did not mention anything about resurrection. This continued until after the passage of generations, the belief in prophecy and miracles became verified, and there remained no doubt about the truth. At that point, the prophet shared with us that God had informed them regarding the resurrection of the dead. By that time, it was easy to accept this belief. So what Maimonides is saying something very interesting, saying why, if resurrection of the dead is so important, is it only mentioned in the prophets? And he says, because in the beginning, the Jewish people had difficulty believing prophets at all. The idea that God communicates with a human being was something so far from their psyche. And so only once it went through many generations where they had appreciated that prophets are real, then the prophets started to tell them about the resurrection of the dead. It's a very interesting explanation over there. And I guess maybe that would go to what Keturah said a moment ago. Similarly, once Mashiach comes, maybe after living in that era for a while, will open us up to handle the miraculous era of the coming of the Mashiach. Now, why is resurrection of the dead so important? And this is the final thing we're discussing today. Why is the resurrection of the dead so important? The resurrection of the dead is so important because it is the ultimate fulfillment of everything that we've been doing. We've been discussing in all the previous classes, particularly number 2, 3, and 4, the purpose of God is God wanted a dwelling place in this world. And when God wants a dwelling place in this world, he means within the physicality of the world and within the people that are in this world. And so when the completion of all that work is done, we will come back down as bodies in souls to appreciate the, we will come back down as bodies in souls to appreciate what we've done. Somebody asked in the beginning of the class, what about the sparks and the whatnot? Yes, all of that work that we've done that we've been discussing in classes 2, 3, and 4 about how we're taking this world and making a home for God and what that means, bringing the awareness of God into this world. After all the generations and after we finally completed the work, and as I gave the description, it's kind of like we're building an electric grid, and when we finally finish the grid, everything lights up. We will come back down to this world to appreciate it, and the revelation of God in this world will be even greater than the revelation of God in the higher worlds. So even us being here on this physical earth, we will appreciate God greater than it is appreciated in the heavenly realms. And so what this tells us, resurrection, is really a very, very important message when you think about it. Because what it's telling us is that we are not just passing through this world to get to some further place, but what we do the here and now is what's most important. And I think that harkens back to the message when we read earlier about the Armageddon. It's not about some crazy, miraculous time. It's about what we're doing right now. What am I dealing with my kids? How am I leading my family? So similarly, Judaism, the view of Mashiach is not just to look forward to some utopian era when all the wicked ones will perish. We're not just looking forward to the Mashiach because anti-Semitism will disappear, although that will happen. The main thing that we're trying to get to is that we are right now working on something that we are going to feel its benefits when the Mashiach comes. And you know what? When the Mashiach comes, we won't have any more time to build it anymore because we're doing the work now. It says when Mashiach comes, we will hearken and request and feel strongly how much we want those days of Mashiach back. Why? Because we miss them. Because then, the days before Mashiach. Because now, in the time of exile, is when we have challenge. When we have challenged and we have a choice, that's when we can uplift ourselves, uplift our spirit, uplift our bodies, and bring awareness of God into a world which is not naturally aware. And when we do that, we will feel the fruits of our labor when the Mashiach comes. And so really as a nutshell of the whole course that we've discussed. We've described how the Mashiach will look like from a very physical aspect. We described really the nuts and bolts of it in lesson 2, 3, and 4, the spiritual meaning behind it. And really, I just love that example of, making that piano into piano, not being woodpeckers at the piano. That's really our job right now. And so why do we spend so much time discussing the Mashiach? Because we have to realize that's our goal, that's where we're heading to. And we can never lose sight of that goal. And when we study about the Mashiach, when we make it a habit to study about Mashiach, not just study about the nitty-gritty of the laws, we're always focused on our goal. We're always focused on where we're going to. If we forget about our goal, we can become a little bit, we can lose our drive, we can lose our push, and sometimes we can settle for things that are comfortable for us, but not necessarily what God wants. As that's something, as I mentioned earlier, is our Judaism, is our religion about what we're trying to accomplish, or is it what God wants? And that's really a part of what the Mashiach is about, is that we were put on this earth to bring the Mashiach. That's our stated goal. That's our mission here on this earth, is to bring the Mashiach. And we all hope and pray that it happens in our lifetime. And so we have to place ourselves in the care of God. We have to place ourselves and ask, what does God want of me? Not what can God do for me? Well, that's famous line of JFK, right? Ask not what God can do for you, but what you can do for God. And so when we all continue studying about Mashiach, I know we spent many, many hours studying about Mashiach, and hopefully this will be an impetus for each and every single one of us to continue studying about Mashiach and to bring to us always a realization. And I'll end off of here with the lines of the Maimonides. You shall view yourself at all times as equally balanced with merits and faults, and view the world similarly, equally balanced with merits and faults. Therefore, if you perform one mitzvah, you tip the scale. If you perform one, you tip the balance of your own and that of all mankind, and affect personal and global deliverance and salvation. So may we all hopefully do that one more deed and tip the scale and bring the Mashiach, may he come speedily in our days. Amen. So thank you all for joining along this journey. Before you head out, I want to mention, of course, that the recordings for all these classes will be sent to you. I also want to show you, just mention what else we're going to do. We're going to continue classes throughout the summer, so heads up on that. We will, at some point when they put it out, do those 3 classes on the resurrection. Very, very interesting stuff, the resurrection. A lot of interesting things about that. I also want to show you just a preview of next year's courses as they are set now. Of course, they're always subject to change, but this is next year's JLI courses. We have Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. It's hard to outrun. It's time to outsmart it. That will be course number 1. Unfortunately, it's timely. Number 2 will be about Jewish meditation. Number 3 will be about Beyond Right. And that means the values that shape Judaism's civil codes. And we're going to discuss fundamental Jewish values and demonstrate how these values guide and shape Jewish civil law, something we touched upon today, Jewish civil law, the Sanhedrin, but very interesting Jewish civil law. And then, of course, we're also going to have an event put on by JLI, and that will be experiencing the depth and meaning of Hasidic song, which in Judaism, Hasidic song is an important thing. We had once an event about Hasidic song. We will go a little bit deeper in that. And so those are the 3 courses, and wish you all a wonderful summer. And I look forward to exploring many other Jewish topics throughout the year with you. I really feel that these year, the JLI courses were really good because they not only, sometimes they go over a lot of worldly stuff, but they also really went a lot into they did a lot of Hasidic philosophy, but explaining it in a really understandable way. And I really like that. And hopefully you've gotten a taste of it. We did a lot of it in lesson 2, 3, and 4. Hopefully you like those lessons, and we'll hopefully continue to give you more Hasidic philosophy in a way that you can appreciate and understand why it's so important. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Great
Rabbi.
night. And I will now open to questions.
Thank you.